Hello, I'm Mark Schaldhaus, and because things on the internet seem to lose their date references pretty easily, today is Friday, November 22nd, 2024. On Monday, September 23rd, 2024, we were past the halfway point on our big long 38-day vacation, driving from Southern California to Orlando, Florida, I guess, and then back, touring through a number of places. In Georgia, we went over to the Robins Air Force Base Museum of Aviation, and social media, which we check out and see what it says, had said plan on, I think, 2 to 3 hours. I would tell you plan on 5 to 6. Plan on the entire day. It's a fantastic museum. Several buildings, I think 3 major buildings, maybe more. Many aircraft outside. Really good museum. Really good portrayal of history and events. World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and really, really super. We thoroughly enjoyed it. Free parking, free admission as I remember, and the docents that we talked to were absolutely super. Signage is really good. A lot of aircraft, a lot of explanation of history, a lot of numerous pieces of armament, miscellaneous gear. Really cool. Really enjoyed it. So here it goes. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you in another one.
Our trip into the Museum of Aviation at Robins Air Force Base was coming up the I-75 from Florida. There was adequate signage on the I-75 to get us there. Our GPS, Garmin GPS, and Google Earth, Google Maps, once again, were having disagreements. And some of these first photos are just some general looks at the museum. There's numerous buildings this museum. There's a lot of ground outside stuff, and this parade ground that has the flags from the 50 states, and it's big. Plan on 4 to 6 hours as an absolute minimum, just if you're going to cruise through this museum. We took over 600 photos and were there about 5 hours, and we were rushed. In the center of the facility is this really beautiful POW MIA memorial dedication monument, and listed the most of the services. Because of its date of dedication, it does not have Space Force. So this was just really well done. There is a replica of an 1896 Chinook glider, Chinook Air Force Base in Illinois, just north of Champaign-Urbana. Is named in his honor. And this one was hanging up in the attic, in the overhead of the museum. The Chinook signage brings up an interesting point, because North Carolina says first in flight, first in powered flight. There were many, many gliders that were operating before the Wright brothers made their powered flight. The museum's Bell UH-1 Iroquois, nicknamed the Huey, is properly labeled, and the OH-58 Kiowa, which is a derivative of the Bell 206 Jet Ranger 2, is nicely displayed. The Bell P-39, and on display in the museum, the Bell P-63 King Cobra, were interesting aircraft. Both of them were the same basic. This 63 was just enhanced. Mid-ship engine. The engine was behind the pilot. The drive shaft came through the pilot's legs, and it had a heavy cannon that fired out the spinner of the aircraft. The Museum of Aviation had probably one of the best, if not the best, display of the B-17 Flying Fortress that I've ever seen. What they did was they dissected the aircraft, so to speak, and had each position labeled as to what they did, how they did it, type thing. And you're going to see it as you roll through these, and you can pause the video and read the specifics on what the pilot, the co-pilot, I think I actually missed the pilot, the waist gunner, the navigator, radio operator, as you go. And it shows where they were in the aircraft because it was kind of sliced down the longitudinal axis of the aircraft. Well, the Flying Fortress Boeing's B-17 was a fantastic aircraft. One of the drawbacks of it was an open aircraft. It was not pressurized, so they're flying at high altitude, cold weather, very cold weather, and unpressurized, unheated, or heated as best they could, and that was its liability. The C-47 Douglas DC-3 variant for the military was also unpressurized. The Curtiss C-46 Commando was pressurized, and then the B-29 was pressurized. So pressurized aircraft followed on. With the weapons that were on the Flying Fortress, there was also an interrupter that stopped the weapons from shooting its own airplane. It is interesting that on display, two of the items are actually the German intelligence that was provided to the Luftwaffe on the B-17, its weaknesses, its potential points, its fuel tanks, things like that. So the fighter pilots that were taking it on had knowledge of the aircraft. It wasn't just that they were flying against an aircraft needed to shoot it up. They had an idea where to shoot. Boeing's follow-on to the B-17 was the Super Fortress, the B-29, which was powered by 4 Wright 3350 engines. These engines were problematic from the get-go, and if I'm not mistaken, they were also referred to as compound recovery. So not only were they supercharged, but the exhaust went through recovery turbines, which were connected directly back to the crankshaft. So it wasn't supercharging the air. That was not the issue. It was taking exhaust gases, converting that into energy to be put back in on the crankshaft. The Boeing B-52, reading the signage, went operational in 1955. It's gone through a number of changes along the way. It is still flying with the United States Air Force in 2024, and I think the internet says there's like 76 of them left. This is an aircraft that has flown so long, 65, 69 years, that the grandsons of some of the first pilots are actually flying the aircraft today. Signage at the museum overall is really good. Outside, it's not always there. This is a Boeing EC-8 Joint Star, and the only way I found that out was by reading the side of the fuselage, which the Air Force puts a lot of information on their aircraft, so when it lands, somebody knows how to take care of it. The civilian Cessna T-50 came into the military as a couple of different aircraft. It came in as the UC-78 and as the UC-78 and AT-8. And I have video, Super 8 video, of a T-50, civilian T-50, landing at Chicago Midway. From 1967-68 time frame, and another T-50 Bobcat landing at Howell Airfield in suburbs of Chicago. I was working to get my enough money to do my private pilot's license, but this airplane was just one of those airplanes you just fall in love when you see it, because it was one of the songbirds for Sky King. The Curtiss C-46 Commando was one of the major engines, major aircraft flying the hump to China-Burma-India into China over the Himalayas. Because it was pressurized, it had the R-18 2800 engine. It gave it almost 2,000 horsepower per engine, whereas the C-47 had just under 1,000 horsepower per engine, was unpressurized. So this aircraft was a much, much better hauler. So a lot of the C-47s ended up in Europe where they weren't carrying as far or as high. The Douglas B-66 destroyer is a derivative of the A-3 Sky Warrior. The A-3 had folding wings and a vertical tail that folded so that you could get it into the carrier deck, into the hangar deck. And if you see these side by side, among other things, you'll see a significant difference in the cockpit. And that's the first giveaway of several things. It's not uncommon for the U.S. military to have a need that can be fulfilled by pretty much a specific civilian aircraft. In de Havilland, the U-6A, the Beaver, filled one of those roles. De Havilland built very well rugged aircraft for the flying environment of Canada's backwoods. If you haven't picked it up, I tried to index these aircraft by their manufacturer's names, by the original manufacturer's names. So this is a Fairchild C-119 flying boxcar sitting out in the yard. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, because Republic had built the Thunderbolt P-47 during World War II, comes up as Fairchild Republic, and I'm not sure how, but affectionately called the Warthog. This is a tank killer with its 30 millimeter gun, and firing from where it is, it's very effective during Desert Storm. The General Atomics MQ-1 Predator drone was hanging up in the attic. These are built by General Atomics, which is now a very diversified company here in San Diego, California. And a lot of the operators of these aircraft are sitting here in the United States, and their aircraft are in the Southwest Asia, Saudi, Kuwait, Egypt, wherever. They may not even see their real aircraft, and yet they're considered to be the pilots because they sit in the room with the controls. This F-111 Aardvark sitting in the back, General Dynamics, and this Cessna T-33 Tweet sitting down on the lower floor underneath the H53. We didn't get any closer photos. For some reason, we didn't end up down in that area of the museum. We ended up elsewhere. There was a lot to see in this museum. The Cayman H-43 Husky, and I've seen a couple of these flying around, and I've intermeshing angled rotor blades, and to get into this aircraft when it was running, you had to come in from the front, whereas conventionally with helicopters you come in from the side. So it was definitely a habit breaker. The Lockheed F-80 Shooting Star and the two-seat derivative of the Shooting Star, the T-33, were there, and these aircraft have historic backgrounds with first introduction of mass-produced jet aircraft for the U.S. military. Another design that is proving its worth, and now having flown for more than 50, 38 plus 20, 60 years, the C-130 Hercules. And this aircraft has gone through numerous modifications, in particular with the engines and the electronics that are incorporated in it. It's also been modified into other aircraft like the Spectre, the gunship, into tankers. The Marine Corps uses it as a tanker aircraft. The Lockheed C-141 Starlifter, a fantastic aircraft for its time, built right there in Georgia. right, literally where we were standing, if I'm not mistaken. And it was replaced by the C-17, the newer version, as a much better aircraft. There were numerous modifications to this aircraft during its service life, including adding air-to-air refueling. I was stationed on the USS Midway, operating out of Yokosuka, Japan for 5.5 years, 2 separate tours, and then went back flying with VRC-50 out of the Philippines for another tour. Did another tour on the USS Nimitz, where we cruised the Western Pacific Indian Ocean, and flew into Osan Air Base in Korea, and the U-2s would fly out of there and come back in, and to watch them take off and land was phenomenal. And go down to Kadena Air Force Base on the island of Okinawa and watch the SR-71, the Blackbirds, fly, and absolutely positively phenomenal. So if you, as you're cruising through the U-2 photos, one of them is a poorly lit photo of the wingtip, because the aircraft has only centerline wheels. When you come in to land, you drop the wingtips down as skids, and the aircraft is chased down the runway by a fast car, frequently a Camaro, and given distances to touchdown, and as the aircraft slows, one wingtip drops, and then the aircraft kind of does a little turn on the runway. But at that point, it's extremely slow. If you can back up your video, read how the engines in this aircraft work. They turn into semi-ramjets, and then read how the start cart for this aircraft works, and the history. 2 Buick engines, later to become a Chevrolet 454. Pretty slick. The McDonnell F-101 Buddha was out there in the yard, and there was also a RF-101 Voodoo, a photo fighter, out there in the yard. Then we go into the McDonnell, and it correctly is McDonnell F4, and numerous pictures here. You could sit in the cockpit and you can see the amount of things they had to play with. One of the big differences between the Air Force and the Navy F4 is the Air Force, or F4, as I understand, they had a control stick and throttle back there and some basic flight instruments, just in case the WWII, weapon systems operator for the Air Force, could fly the aircraft if he had to from the back seat, as I understand it. In the Navy, the radar intercept officer did not have any flight controls. He was along for the ride. There was a F-16 Eagle, McDonnell Douglas aircraft, out at the entrance. That was the one up on that pylon, and then this one inside, and there was also a cockpit simulator, probably a procedures trainer, that was inside that you could sit in. And once again, a lot of switches, a lot of circuit breakers to play with if you wanted to. When I saw the specs on the McDonnell Quail, I was kind of laughing, because it's got a General Electric J85 engine in it, and the T2 that I flew as a flight instructor in Kingsville, Texas, had 2 of them. And parked out in the yard is what I think is a MiG-21 fish bed. As I remember, the spine back of the fish bed was more prominent than this, but the rest of it fits in, so it may be one of the variants. North American also had a multi-service aircraft. The AT-6 for the Army Air Corps transitioned into the Air Force. The Navy referred to a derivative of that as the SNJ. Both of them refer to it as the Texan. I've also heard the SNJ referred to as the Harvard, which is the name that the Brits gave the North American AT6 or T6 or SNJ that they got. I got to fly in the back seat of one of these at an air show. We had a 6-plane formation, and I think 4 of them were SNJs and 2 of them were T6s. And in order to tell the difference, you literally had to park them next to each other. It was the vertical fin and some of the reinforcements around the canopy and a few other minor details. The Air Force had the North American T-28 Alpha, which is shown here. It has a 2-bladed prop, a 700 horsepower engine. The Navy had the T-28 Bravo, which has a 3-bladed prop, no tail hook, and the Charlie, which has a different 3-bladed prop and a tail hook. And I've got about 125 hours in T-28 Bravos and Charlies, and they are an impressive airplane. There was a pretty darn good presentation of the Wild Weasel mission, which is take a specially equipped aircraft out there, bait the bad guys to turn on their surface-to-air missiles, radar systems, and then you lob a missile or bombs, usually a missile, at the radar site. And usually, if I'm not mistaken, not my specialty, it's referred to as a beam rider missile. And it basically says, okay, this is the radar I want to track, and then it goes down the beam and takes out the radar site. We found Northrop F-89 Scorpions in several locations, and for some reason I've always liked the aircraft, maybe because I'm a Scorpio. But this is also the first aircraft to fire a nuclear air-to-air missile. It was a test. They never had to fire it in reality, and several aircraft were modified for that very specific mission. With the Ryan PT-22, we're going from the late 1930s and a maximum speed of about 125 miles an hour. Off to the F-84 Thunderjet from Republic, which went into Korea, and a maximum speed of 620, and then stepping up to the Republic F-105, and the F-105 Thunder Chief has a speed of 1,360 miles per hour. So in the span of say 1940 to 1960, we've really accelerated the speed of aircraft. This Sikorsky H-19 Chickasaw is carrying a massive radial engine, a Wright 1300, angled in its nose section, and then the drive shaft comes up between the pilot and the co-pilot to a transmission, and then it goes vertical into the mast and horizontal back to the tail rotor. The Army generally names their helicopters after Indian tribes or prominent Native Americans. So when you see Huey, there's no Huey Indian tribe. That's really an Iroquois. Going through A&P school, and I am a licensed A&P, and after A&P school, working on aircraft like the Twin Beach and a few crop dusters, working on radials, and having flown now more than 1,000 hours with radial engines. I absolutely love radial engines. They are just so smooth flying, and they will take a beating. And there were numerous radial engines and jet engines on display at the museum, and a few horizontally opposed a few horizontally opposed engines as well. There's 2 engines in this mix that are extremely notable. The Pratt & Whitney 4360, which was a 28-cylinder engine. It was problematic. I think it went to the B-50 and to a few commercial aircraft, but it was problematic the entire time. Just too complicated, too many things happening, and just never gained any favor. And the other one is the Wright R3350. This is referred to a duplex recovery engine sometimes. A compound recovery engine was how I learned about it in school. And what it does is, in that mode, the exhaust goes through power recovery turbines and PRTs, and instead of doing a supercharger thing with the intake, what it does is it has shafts right back down to the crankshaft. So instead of increasing the air pressure, the engine's already supercharged. Instead of increasing the air pressure going into the cylinders, it's recovering that exhaust energy and putting it in the crankshaft. It was also problematic. No airplane I ever flew carried a missile. They had the AIM-7 Sparrow, which was a common missile on the in the air wings that I was flying with. It carried on the A7, carried on the F4 and the F-14. They had the AIM-9 Sidewinder, which was carried on the A7, the F4, and the F-14 as well. And then they have the SA-2, which was a very effective Soviet block anti-aircraft missile, and some nuclear bombs as well. And I think this one outside is one of the many variants of the Nike missile system. I think there were a couple of these parked on the south side of Chicago to defend Chicago just in case. We're going to kind of lean away from aircraft and missile systems and whatever else and cover world events that the museum addresses, and I don't know if I have the slides in the ideal order. They do address the attack on Pearl Harbor, as you can see here, and then they cover the theaters of operations as European, China-Burma-India, and Asian. And there was a lot of information here. I'm going to unfortunately probably go through and delete some of the slides to keep the video short, but they did a really good job of how the various phases of World War II in the various theaters worked, because you had the Japanese fighting primarily the British with the help of the Americans in the China-Burma-India area, and then you had the Americans primarily fighting with the help of the Brits and the Aussies through the Western Pacific, coming up into what I think the museum classified as Asia. And then you have everybody, which was primarily the Americans, substantially. I mean, we had the highest percentage of troops in the European theater, and they covered all the theaters. They did have a Jeep. Actually, I think they had a couple of Jeeps on display, and the best thing I liked about it was they were properly labeled. And you're talking to a guy who gets into this, because people will tell you that the official designation of the Jeep is the Jeep. It's not. If it was built by Ford, it was the GPW, the quarter-ton 4x4 type truck. And if it was built by Willys, then it was the MB, and it was a general purpose vehicle, GP, and that just became Jeep. And it was not after the cartoon character in the Popeye series. Had nothing to do with that. It had to do with general purpose, and general purpose being GP, like HU1 became Huey. I really enjoyed the Women's Air Force Service Pilot presentation. As a naval aviator, I flew with women in the left seat while I was in the right seat, and in my right seat while I was in the left seat, and I've been an instructor of student naval aviators, female student naval aviators. I will tell you in all honesty that they are just like the guys. You have the good ones, you have the bad ones, and you have the ones that just shouldn't be anywhere near an airplane. During World War II, the WASPs flew every type of aircraft wherever it had to go, primarily as ferry pilots. So they were ferrying these across the Atlantic and doing it very well. When somebody... I disagree with the statement that women should be in combat unrestricted. but women do have a very great potential to the military success, and these women did a lot of flying. After serving in Alaska and the Aleutian Islands with the artillery, my dad joined the 101st Airborne Division and jumped into Normandy on D-Day. And this presentation of Airborne was fantastic. Like they did with the B-17 crew, they took the airborne and the glider forces and put together a really good this is how they did it, this is why they did it concept. And you'll see both in the museum, you will see both the paratroopers jumping out of C-47, so to speak, the Skytrains, Douglas Skytrains, and also the various gliders that were used to be towed behind the C-47s. And a C-47 could tow 2 gliders at the same time. There's some things you learn in the military, and you plan to the greatest detail because you know what's going to happen when it starts. Your plan is just going to go out the window. But what your plan gave you was, it gave you options. It gave you insights into what your capabilities, what your limitations were, what your opportunities might be. And one of the things that happened on D-Day with the paratrooper jumps of the 101st, the 82nd, and the Brits was that the troops were not parachuted into where they were supposed to be. They were all over the place, and because of that, there was total chaos. The Germans didn't know where they were. They didn't know where they were, and there was no logic that anybody could evaluate as to what this assault was becoming. So it actually slowed the Germans down to our benefit. And the gliders had an initial beef in the fact that they did not get any additional hazard pay. The paratroopers got a hazard pay, I think was $50 a month, which was a lot of money. The glider troops initially did not. It was finally fought, and they finally got it, and they deserved it. They were riding in very frail aircraft, very little protection, and instead of coming down in a small space, they were going to come. They needed a field or a road to land on, and that might be hard to find. The Korean War, late 1950 to 1953, then with the armistice, theoretically it's still going on. It's still going on. And then you have the MASH series, which was actually an anti-Vietnam series placed in Korea so that it could kind of get accepted on television. Living in Japan for 5.5 years, the Philippines for 2, and on flying status the entire time. Flew into Korea many times. Great country. The people are absolutely fantastic. They appreciate us being there. Always felt safe over there, and a lot of history in the area, and a lot of things just to roam around and see. Quite a place to be. During my time in the Saudi desert with Desert Storm, Desert Saber, whatever the effort after Desert Storm was, I spent a year out there. Landed at an airfield, and some Army guys were running a EOD remote controllable, wire controllable gizmo that they said they were going to be using it for mine removal and whatever else in the battle theater, long before we got to these IED issues. And there's a lot of models that were in the museum, really well done, and had to give them credit for that. They're beautiful. As I've said in some of our other videos, we're on a schedule. I set up usually to see 2 things, maybe 3 things in the same day, based on what I found up on social media, on the internet, and whatever else, what I could find out on the homepage. If you're headed to the Robins Air Force Base to see the Museum of Aviation, I highly recommend you cut out the entire day. This is a fantastic and a huge museum, and this has just been a short abbreviated tour of it. The signage is good, the aircraft are good, the additional displays, the weapon systems, the vehicles, the people that are involved, all fantastic. This is a great museum. Absolutely enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you in another one.